Welcome to Pure Signal, where we cut through the noise to bring you what matters in technology and AI. I'm Vincent Yates, the Global Chief Data Scientist, and joining me is Kevin Erickson, our North America CEO. How are you today, Kevin?
I am great. It's good to see you. Wish I was there with you in person, but
Yeah, where are you joining us today, Kevin? From where?
I'm in Atlanta, so I had a chance to visit one of our clients here this morning and spend some time with the team. So it's been really good. So wish I was with you in person, but I'm glad we could still do this.
I'm glad we could do it too. Thanks for joining. Well, listen, I want to talk to you a little bit about what you've been up to and what you've heard from clients broadly. But just to kick us off, I just came back from a quick trip to New York, actually. And one of the topics that was at hand and just kept coming up through the night over and over was really around the question of, hey, we have all these AI tools. We have pockets where we have really good adoption and we're seeing incredible results. But broadly speaking, our people are not yet using it. And I don't know how to solve that. I'm curious from your standpoint. I mean, Kurt, I went through some of the transition. A lot of our clients are going through the transition. What have you seen to be really effective in really adoption of AI tools across the staff?
Yeah. It's interesting. That came up this afternoon. I was meeting with members of our team and they asked a similar question. And I would say if I were to assess us as a team, where our adoption isn't where I want it to be, actually. So I mean, I would say that we're getting better. It's been slow growth, really through opportunities, and you have certain pockets for it. But was it actually a bit interesting? Have to be a completely biased about what I or just recency bias from today, but our met with two cohorts, our younger cohort and our older. The younger cohort are like, why aren't everyone using this more? The older cohort's like, I don't know what to do. Yeah, I still think it's kind of some of that, but what I'm intrigued about is I think you just have to force it. And, we've talked about that before here, where different clients from a developer perspective are using it. But I think that from people are using it for efficiencies. I think that's happening more and more every day. How we use it to force different client outcomes and those elements, I think is still to come. I had another interesting conversation with one of our sister CEOs today and asking a very similar conversation of just like how you get people to use it, what's allowed, what are we able to do. And I think I channeled some of this to your maverick that I such appreciate about you is I think you just got to go do it. You got to force it. You got to work through it. We're going to have to continue to get our teams just to be comfortable. And I think ultimately, I think if folks, there's not an option anymore. You and I've talked about this before. Yeah, it's easier said than done, but we just have to continue to push through it. And our clients are demanding it. The bottom line is about to demand it. I mean, we were starting to see more areas where we can't operate effectively without using tools. And so my hope though is still people get captured by what it allows them to do for their own discovery, but in ways that doesn't happen. Yeah, I think ultimately we're going to have people that are willing to change. So it doesn't directly answer your question, but I think it's a personal choice at this point. But the choice is ultimately going to be where you want to work, not how you want to work.
I think that's really wise, especially that last part, where you want to work, not how you want to work. Those two are gonna go together. It's gonna be a strategic choice for organizations. And I think
Yeah.
it's becoming increasingly obvious that those who choose not to do AI are gonna be left in the dust. And, we hear all sorts of examples across our clients and internally, as you alluded to, where people say, look, I like AI. I think it's useful. I use ChatGPT in my personal life in pockets, but I'm just busy. I don't have the energy. I don't have the time. I don't even know what I would do with it in the course of my actual job. And I think there's just this serious activation energy, for lack of a better word, that seems to be required to get people to actually use it. But what's remarkable is once you cross that first wave, that activation energy is hit, it seems to be all downhill. It seems to be super easy. They just use it more and more because they realize, wow, this actually is incredibly useful. This actually can make my life better. And I think that unlock is the most critical part. And the question I think largely becomes how do you get people over that first hump? How do you get them just to start using it a little bit? Just even if it's a bit contrived, but just use it once or twice or three times. And all of a sudden you get to a place, I don't know what the number is exactly, but somewhere in, single digits in my mind, use it single digit number of times. All of a sudden, you're like, wow, I'm hooked. There's this famous quote that back in the early days of Facebook, when they're trying to get people to adopt, some data scientists that I know discovered that really, if you can get somebody to upload 6 photos of friends, they were Zuckerbergs for life. They were just hooked for life. I think the same analogy and probably a similar KPI would exist for these tools. If we had access to the data, we'd see it, which
Yeah.
is once you use it some number of times, I don't know quite know what it is, but I think it's low. Some number of times, all of a sudden you'll be hooked for life, and you're gonna be like, "Wow, I can use it everywhere. And I can use it here and here and here." And then the question just becomes like, how do you, as an organization, help your people overcome that energy?
Yeah.
And I think it's multifaceted. I think part of it's that you have to make it easy. You want to lower the activation energy as much as possible. And that means giving them tools that are pretty good, and be state of the art, but pretty good. You need to make it easy for them to use it, not a lot of hurdles to go through. Just kind of here's a tool, you should try and use it. Give them some prompts, some ideas, some examples. Have places where other people are presenting what they're using it for to inspire new ideas. And those things are all good, but I don't think they're enough actually. And it just seems to require something more, that internal locus to force them to do it. And that could be done in a couple ways. We always advocate for the Tiger team. So get some AI maximalists to come sit with those people, like, and just, all right, Kevin, I'm going to sit with you today. Just do your day job. And I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to help identify opportunities where you could be using this. And I'll just show you how to do it. Like, it's one thing to say you could do this, you could do this. It's a different thing to actually go do it for them. So I think that's part of it. I think a different tack that we've seen be pretty effective, though, is actually drive the behavior through incentives and some metric that you're going to use the stick for effectively. Like, thou shalt use this or you'll be in trouble, whatever that means, right? So, and again, I think that the key here is you don't want the metrics ideally to be like how many times you log in or how many questions you ask, because that feels a lot like a checkbox exercise in my mind. But in
Yeah.
our business, of course, sort of thinking about T&M or time and materials type models generally, you can imagine the metric could be how many story points you're doing if you're a developer, or in our business, how many dollars per human hour are we getting? And that gives them some flexibility to think about, well, maybe I can charge more, or maybe I can just do more work, or maybe I can whatever. And those are all good things. I'm not opposed to people do that, but it quickly becomes apparent, self-evident that you're gonna have to either work, 80 hours a week to keep up with your peers, or you're gonna have to use the tools. And it becomes a self choice. Like, you can choose either one of those. I'm happy either way, but you're going to have to make a choice because not doing it is no longer an option.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of things we've seen broadly across our client base. But I don't know what are your reactions to that?
Yeah. Well, I think that you know me long enough that I prefer the carrots over the sticks, but I think we're kind of like that. But I'll give a couple just quick thoughts that and one I really resonate with kind of the Tiger team scenario of like walking with people in the shoes, and I think really actually I think that we know we've have some of our clients that we're doing that work for. They've asked us to come in with their executive team and doing that, and I think that's a really interesting way. You think about how much will a company pay for executive coaching for their senior team to be able to work more effectively. So, and you put it in that context, having AI coaches or however you want to do that, we've heard about it happening in different lives. But I know that for us, it's been actually an unlock for one of our clients for our buyer to be able to get access to be able to use those things more with his teammates, his peers, has been to he'd offer that to them. So I think that's interesting in how we do that for our internal team. But a couple, specifics. I think it's interesting on the velocity. Again, I know we're still in the it really, at least for where our maturity is at, it's mainly in the efficiency plays. So I think about from a development team perspective, we're clearly seeing faster velocity. Yeah, I think people that are skeptical, especially they're starting to realize what they can do with it. So I think that that will gain momentum. It'll be interesting. I'm sure there'll be some clients that'll be a bit skeptical. So I think that will continue. I think what's going to be interesting is though, how do you start to radically think about projects differently, not just simply about doing things faster? That's the part, the next step for me that is interesting. I think some of that's going to have to be constricted in terms of how we do methodologies, how we work through that. Obviously, we're revisiting some of those elements today. That would be one way to get to that. The industry in general is really shifting rapidly to an outcome based scenario, which I think how we do that, some of that's going to be how you use tools to achieve those outcomes, but there's going to be a lot of effort. We have to figure out how to commercially do that and across a whole new different, it's not just in particular world. I mean, a lot of different worlds, everyone's going towards this where and I think it's a really good change, but it's a big change and it's going to be hard I mean, we're going to be changing elements. And then, yeah, I can think of a very practical thing. It's mid-year CPM type performance management season for us. And so, yeah, just tweaking some of those elements. I mean, as simple as saying of like, what is your maturity of using AI tools on a scale of X to Y? How does that work through that? Like for you, you'd get gold stars across the board. I mean, you teach them every day how to use it better. Like, how do we actually reward that? How do we incentivize that? How do we actually make that be a higher part of your job? And then how do we ultimately say, hey, your productivity is subpar. And I think, but ultimately where it will end up is where you were alluding to, is that it's going to be impossible to get the work done without using AI. So ultimately you're going to be a lower performer and you're going to be out. I think that's going to happen at the human capital level. I think it's going to happen with clients in general. And then across every discipline, that's ultimately, the ultimate barometer. I mean, you use your different term, destructive capitalism, whatever you want to use about it. I mean, ultimately, that's going to be the barrier, is that you can't succeed unless it's propped up some way, right? Which is always going to be ultimately my fear, is that, I mean, I'm talking in a meta perspective, not just simply in our little world, but is, do we propped up, old ways of doing things because we're trying to protect versus just allowing the natural evolution to occur, which is going to require people to do that. It just seems like at least in our business, it's naturally accelerating quite a bit this year, much more so in the previous 24 months. And I just think you're on that same slope of seeing that growth. And I get really excited now as I think about what's the different use cases that actually change the way we do work, not just speeding up the way we do work. But personally haven't seen a ton of that, but I think we're right around the corner of that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting on a couple of fronts. I think one is you raise a good point, which is the upskilling is more than just learning how to use the technology. It's actually going to require an upskilling across how does our commercial model actually work? How do we bring a differentiated value to our clients? Look, at the end of the day, from my perspective, what AI is really doing is commoditizing the information asymmetry across any provider and their customers. So what made Salesforce so great, or your favorite SaaS doesn't have to be Salesforce, the first one that came to mind, but like, is that they kind of understood how CRMs work. They understood how the sales process works. Well, you know who else knows that? Salespeople.
Yeah.
And so if
Yeah.
salespeople can build a bespoke app for themselves for their personalized workflow that they enjoy, and companies can still get as much, if not more, data than they had before for all of their reporting, does Salesforce really do anything that interesting anymore? It was an opinionated workflow effectively. And so my point is that in that case, AI is going to remove that sort of asymmetry of knowledge and information. In the consulting context, it's the same thing. What we know is how to deliver technology and solutions because we've done it for everybody else in your industry or all your competitors, for example. We've done it more than once, and you haven't. You've done it 0 times. So we're bringing that to bear in that context. In a world where AI actually knows everything that we know conceptually, not literally, but conceptually, is that information asymmetry even there? Probably not. So then the question is like, well, okay, if that is a fundamental premise of how a lot of things are sold in technology, then what happened in this new world? I think that's what you were saying, which is it's going to require a different way of thinking about how do we quantify the value that we actually bring. And that's going to require a different way of thinking and working across the organization. And that's a whole nother set of sort of challenges that you have to do when you think about upskilling your people. It's not just how do I sell these sort of nice packaged solutions? Here's our accelerators. Here's what you need to learn how to sell. Here are the signals for that. Go pitch them on that. It's now something much deeper, much harder, and more sophisticated. And I think that's part of the fear. But it certainly starts with just learning how to use the tools.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like everything goes back to such simplistic things, elements, traits. Like, who's going to be successful in that model where you have to learn? Well, it's someone who's has a learning mindset, growth mindset, someone who is curious, someone who's got the discipline to figure it out, someone who's got the perseverance to work through the things to figure it. Yeah, someone who gets excited about doing it in a different way. I mean, I think the exciting, for us, I want employees that get excited to be able to serve and have a superior client outcome, solving complex problems, using tools. Like, can we get in a workforce that gets excited about solving something today that they couldn't have solved before, and the time frame it's so much faster, or that, like there's people that value that. There's others that maybe don't, or not that people, I don't think we have a ton of employees or that want to just kind of do rubber stamp every single day, but there is different degrees of willingness to change. I mean, it's the classic change curves. I mean, I don't think this is any different from what makes someone successful. Particular now when you're asking a workforce that spans 40 to 50 years, I mean, you're going to have to retool. And I think this is just a more evolutionary way. Again, we've talked about before, where does this fit on the technical evolutionary change? And you think about what was the experience for someone that was mid-career when personal computers were coming out. Like, I mean, they had to radically change how they were thinking about work. I mean, work accelerated exponentially. that's where I think we're at. And so I think the companies that get excited about that, employees that do that, I think are going to really thrive. And those that hold on to the old way they do it can go work in large US city public education or something like that. I mean, you can find places where you don't want to change. I think though that the people that want to use AI, they say people that are going to be willing to go work all the time, they're going to be willing to go solve that problem. And I think that you can be a company that can be really good at cultivating that craft and cultivating people that pursue that. And I think you're going to find that you're going to get higher usage faster. And then we have to intersect with people that really need to do it. But one thing that I've been really just struggling with for us is that I think that we need to be more aggressive in actually like changing our ways of working and doing that intentionally. It doesn't mean you have to like be prescriptive from point A to point B to point C, but I mean, I think that you have to work through that. I think unfortunately, in our business at times, we use a lot of domain knowledge that's experiential based, and I think we could actually change it. So some of the larger firms that have a easier ability to kind of change their workflow methodology, one, they'll change it for AI, but the reality is they're going to continue to force it down a path where even all those roles will eventually just be automated.
Well, I think that's right. And I think that back to your point, like it's going to go back to that Silicon Valley in its peak day when it was all about who can learn the fastest and closing the OODA loop the quickest. Those are the organizations that succeed. And that's going to be true here too, especially when there's change in the market and disruption. Those who can learn the fastest will win. And I think the way that we've seen consistently, the way you learn the fastest as an organization made up of humans is hire humans that are naturally curious, that are naturally good at asking the tough questions, doing the 7 why type exercise, but constantly in the back of their head, just as an ongoing process to really figure out what is the core driver of what we're trying to accomplish here and what's the best way to do it. Not that we always do it, but the best way to do it, given the constraints and given what we have at our hand, because what we have in hand now is radically different than what we've had before. And it will necessitate a new way of working from a process standpoint, from a people standpoint, at least in their approach, and then from a technology standpoint. And so I think that is the big opportunity in front of every organization. I think the flip of that is exactly what you said, which is large organizations, the incumbents, if you will, have the most to lose and have built up governance processes for good, very rational reasons to be entrenched in the way they work. That is to say, they're not unwilling to change, but they're going to be very slow in what they change. Because if you're, the size of Microsoft, or you're the size of Accenture, or you're the size of whatever your biggest favorite company is, you have a lot to lose. If you mess up 5% of your top line, that's going to be a really big number that has a big impact on your organization. If, on the other hand, you're a mid market, sort of a large mid market organization, you have everything to gain. And so, in these moments, I think what we're going to see are the mid market companies get a lot more aggressive. They have the agility, they have the conviction. Oftentimes, they're still sort of founder led or privately owned in some cases, and that gives them more flexibility. They're not quite as beholden to quarterly earnings as large publicly traded companies are. And even if they are publicly traded, they have a different class of investor by and large. It's not the same institutional investors who just want their steady 7% return quarter over quarter, kind of just hit the numbers, move on, hit the numbers, move on. They want real growth. And so I think that becomes the big opportunity. It's not just the efficiency thing that you said, it is also the revenue growth and the opportunity that you alluded to, right? And I think that's the excitement for mid market or large mid market in particular. They have enough money they can invest. They have a leadership team that is probably still pretty hungry. And I think they have everything to gain. And so my guess is, as we look towards this into this year, you'll see at least one, but probably several, really start to grow very rapidly and disrupt the incumbents above them. And that will catalyze a bunch of change in those large organizations that we've seen many, many times before, right? Like when Google moved into the office space with their G Suite, we saw Microsoft catalyze and move in a pretty remarkable way for that organization. I was there on the inside. Like that was clearly top priority. And we took risks we just generally wouldn't have taken with the sort of traditional Office suite because we had to. And it did wonderfully. I think Microsoft Office online is still better than G Suite is personally. That's my personal belief.
Right.
But
Yeah.
my point is like they can move, they will move eventually, but it will take some upcoming upstart, mid-market moving into that enterprise space, taking huge market share quickly for them to really think, wow, if I don't do this right now, we're not going to be here anymore.
And I think that what's so tricky, so I'll just, won't use any names. I told you earlier, I was in a client site this morning and we're in a multi-vendor environment, and the client's asking for change that's going to hurt one of the vendors that we're working with and one of the partners that we're working with, and you're sit there. So I'm like, part of me is like, okay, client A, you just got to go tell what you want, right? And it's part of me that's easier. But then I'm also, what's interesting to me is I found myself, at least with one of our partners, I put myself in their shoes, and I'm thinking about where they're at, right? If they have to change, it's going to change the way they do work. It's going to become more automated. It's going to ultimately reduce either the revenue or the people that they're using to do it. Like that's an inevitable fact of life where we're at. And so, well, what is your choice as a CEO? I put myself in their spot. Do you sit there and try to continue? Do you go fast with that? Do you accept it? Do you change? Do you acknowledge change is going to have to require us to be able to have some loss? Could be loss of revenue, loss of team. And I think that what's really hard is that, are the leaders going to have the courage to make those choices? Some of it's going to be what we talked a second ago about carrots versus sticks and finding employees that want to do it. Some of it's going to be, yeah, we may have to change our business. And, my motivation to my teams is going to be, you either need to change with us and retool, repurpose so we can go through this, or, it may just be a different type of job that you have to pursue. And I think that we're not quite there yet, but we're going to be there, to your point, really soon. And I think that that's where the leadership roles are going to have the courage to be able to look really at their teammates and their client and people and say, hey, we can't not change. And, or frankly, we aren't going to be able to change. And that's going to have different meanings for us too. And it is a natural process of growth that this occurs. It's easier said when you're on one side of the equation versus the other. But I mean, I think that you're going to see a lot of things, and I go back to my kind of somewhat snarky comment about public education. Like, there's a lot of things that trying to keep the status quo in for lots of reasons, some good, some bad. But this is a be a moment in our professional career where it doesn't matter what your desire is. Like, you're going to change, and I think that's just a question of how painful it is for you and your team. But we
Yeah.
have to acknowledge that for some individuals and companies, it has real world impacts that are not easy if you're having to make those choices.
No, no. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. This is to me a bit like, and I wasn't in the professional workforce when this happened, but it feels a lot like when computers started showing up in the workplace. So computers were a hobbyist toy. It was a nerd toy. Like, great. People started realizing, well, wait a minute. This is actually a lot more effective and efficient than using a typewriter when I'm drafting my documents, or I can create visuals I couldn't create by hand, or not, I can do it faster or higher iteration speed, etc. And so what you started seeing were people effectively bringing their computers to work and digitizing their workforce. I remember my dad, who's an attorney, actually tell a story about it. He was the first attorney at his law firm that started working on an actual computer. Like, he brought in a computer and started working on that. He was the first one to use a word processor. And he talked about how everybody thought it was like the dumbest thing in the world. And like, why would you do that? We have secretaries, like that was in the air where they literally had secretaries out through their office, dedicated secretary and secretary pool who would, draft your memos, and you'd sort of dictate what your legal whatever documents were, and they'd go type that up for you. He's like, no, it's way faster, way more efficient for me just to do it myself. And everybody around him was like, you're insane, you're crazy, why are you doing that? But then the young people were like, yeah, no, this is better for me. Actually, I have a differentiated advantage compared to the legacy people in this company, and I'm going to lean into it because it helps me. And I think that's where we are with AI. And so to your point, if you think about like the gold star thing, back to your point, like, yeah, I love getting gold stars. I'm pumped. On the other hand, some small part of me is a little bit disappointed because for the past year or two, I've had this kind of unfair advantage that I was able just to crank through a bunch of that work in a differentiated way because I was using AI. Like, it just gave me a huge leg up on all my peer group, if you will. And I think that will disappear, and it will continue to disappear for good reason. That's what should happen here. But I really am reminded of that moment when it's like, hey, we're gonna have laptops, and we're gonna have computers in the office, and I'm gonna use that to do my actual work. And remember the early days of that, he had to bring his own, like he had to buy the thing, and it wasn't cheap back then, right? Like,
Yeah.
he had to buy it and he had to bring it. But he was like, this is good enough. This makes my job so much better that I'm willing to pay for it. And I think AI is probably similar. I paid for it, right? Like, I'm happy to pay for it. I paid for it before we had anything within Credera. I was like, I need to buy these tools and to use them. And I think that's just going to be true across organizations. Now, I think we're at a point now where we're almost 2 years into this thing, right? Like we're at a point now when I think most organizations have adopted at least basic tools. If nothing else, they've turned on Copilot probably for their
Yeah.
organizations. They have access to that. We'll see that. But I don't know. Is that again, it was even a little bit before you probably in your time, that sort of
Yeah.
computer transformation. But does it seem familiar? Does it resonate with you?
I mean, it does. I was in the workforce for that, but I mean, it was just, but different, even like ones that were less, those that, I mean, you think about who brought iPads in before you had them, or, smart devices, that'd be an example that I lived through that, people were using their own tools in that setting before companies adopt it with enterprise solutions or different things. But yeah, I think that this is where, as an executives, and both, in our role, we advise clients and we also run our business. It's like, where do you have the wisdom, but also really the courage to kind of force change? And I think that, I do think I agree with you that companies that have less ingrained process or needs are going to make it easier. And it's kind of we have funny days. I see another example from my day today where, we're talking about organizational structures, that are, growth related, different things, all really good topics. And you're spending so much time trying to like, not what would you design if you had, yeah, in a greenfield scenario, but the tension is like you're building from all these different stuff and they all have different trade-offs. There's different problems. And, it can be really challenging when you're trying to get a solution that is getting you on the right environment, but yet, it's not going to solve, and nothing's going to solve all the problems. And every different people are going to have different use cases. And I think, that's just, it's possible that this will such jump how things are done that maybe you can kind of swipe away, or just in this case, probably bury a lot of decisions and debt, whatever that equivalency is, and just kind of change. And I think that's going to really, companies that can go that faster are going to be really helpful. Ones that try to just not necessarily stay in the past, but just even get hung up on the ways that they worked or the ways that they think they should work. And, I think obviously we've seen the benefit of different smaller teams, hybrid teams, agile teams. I mean, this is just a continuation of those themes, but it's just amazing how much time and energy can be spent in even not, trying to grow, but really you're really defending the past in different ways. And so I do think smaller companies, or maybe the way a bigger company, like in our case, you have to almost create pockets where you have greater autonomy and smaller units that can be able to work away. One thing I get really excited about is the amount of time that we spend on centralized processing and tools and data collection. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that you do really trying to report up. And, if we can envision a world where that becomes so much easier through other means, like that would like reduce all these needs to have all the same crap and the same, you'll have unifying things that are plumb lines through your core processes, but yeah, you can have different ways to do that. And I think that will really help people be more nimble.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And I guess we've talked a lot about the change that's needed from the business standpoint, the commercial standpoint, and we've really focused thus far on people who are already in the business. How do you get them upskilled? How do you retool them? How do you help them see the opportunity and give them the right incentives, whether it be carrot or stick or both, but sort of the math or they're inclusive or. It's also interesting about like if you bring on new talent as you continue to grow, you evolve. What are the characteristics of those people? How do you go about finding them? And one thing I'll highlight that I think is kind of fascinating is, and it I think just highlights this cultural difference between the organizations that are getting it and those who aren't. There are many, many tools now, one quite famously written by a kid who was, I think, at MIT to help you cheat during these leak code interviews, right? So he had a little tool up, it was listening to the conversation, it transcribes in real time, and then gives you the answer that you can then effectively read back to the interviewer. And there's been an enormous amount of energy now spent on how do you detect these tools? How do you see? I want to share your screen. I want to see what else you see. Show me your whole room and make sure you're not cheating with another device sitting next to your computer, et cetera. So, look, it's a cat and mouse game. People will continue doing it. Fine. But to me, it misses the point. To me, like that is embracing of the old and trying to prevent you. It's like, hey, we've invented the calculator, but I don't want to see any calculators on your desk when you're taking this math test. Or when I did my check ride for aviation, I had a little pocket flight calculator that I would use, and he's like, you can't use that. And I was like, why not? And he's like, well, because what if the batteries die? I'm like, well, I have a spare right here. He's like, what if those die too? And I'm like, I mean, sure. Like all these things are possibilities, but why wouldn't I use it if it makes my life better, easier, and make better decisions quicker? Like it seems like a good thing to do. And that's my point with AI. I think that what you see really good, savvy organizations doing is flipping the script and saying during the interview process, we're expecting you to use AI. If you're not using AI during the interview, you're not doing it right. And we don't really want you here. So during the interview, show me what tools are you using. I want to see how you actually interact with them. And it becomes quite difficult to fake all of a sudden because you see people who have been using these tools effectively. They've developed some muscle there. They've developed some intuitions about how do I ask questions? What kinds of questions should I ask? How do I verify that these answers make sense? And I don't need to over verify, but I also need to verify to some degree. How do you actually interact with these tools to deliver the work that's required during that interview? And I think that's just one silly example, but a real example of, a question during an interview like what AI tools are you using and how are you using them? And then the interview should actually test that skill because I think that is a core competency now. In the same way that I don't test people like, hey, why don't we draft some code on the whiteboard anymore? Like at one point, sure, we did. Now I'm like, no, we're gonna like code this together, like pull up, a notepad, let's code. Let's actually just like code in real time together and see how you work with these tools. This to me feels the same. What are your thoughts on sort of on the new wave of talent? What are the things that you think are really worth over indexing on or identifying early in that process?
Not to repeat what I'd said kind of earlier, but I tend to, it's the core traits, how you figure it out, how you think, what you use that. I mean, I think I concur. I'm intrigued. I have, yeah, just how you test, whether it be for interviewing, how we test now in an academic setting, what is the whole concept of take home tests, all that stuff is all different. But I mean, at the end of the day, I want people that can solve problems and get through solutions. And yes, maybe it'd be nice to have my pod to be able to manually do, slide rule math in case you lose all your tools from 30,000 feet. But I think for most cases, like I mean, if you don't use tools to be able to do it, we don't need to have that root cause. I mean, I think it's actually a really fascinating thing. I was talking earlier this week to an aspiring author, and we're really like working like what is creative thought and how that author was using tools and what was created, the purpose, the safeguards they put in. But it's almost like if you don't use tools, and not to write for you, but in that case, more likely editing, like it's like it creates a huge disadvantage. I think for us, and if we don't have employees that are figuring out a way to do it, it's going to take too long. And so I think you have to, one way I think you start testing is you have solutions that can't get done in a time frame without using that. But even that question, like what you just posed a really simple question, tell me what AI tools you use and how do you use them? Like, I mean, that should be standard question. I know we've changed to a lot of things that we were questioning now, but like, I would think if we asked took 1,000 people in our company and asked that question, we'd probably be pretty disappointed in the results. But I think that I actually believe if you can get a competitive advantage without cheating, I don't think using tools is cheating. That's like if sure, I can plow the field with a horse and a buggy, or I can use a freaking automated tractor. I can. It's like why would you not? And I think that that's what we have to have that mindset. And I think it's really foolish when we try to not use that. And you have to have certain safeguards. But I mean, as you were going through your example, I'm just thinking about medicine. Yeah, I want my doctor to know different things, but what doctor does anything without tools today? What procedure is done without tools? What diagnostic is not done? I mean, so it's like, yeah, I mean, it's like you have to have wisdom and experience. This is why I get really bullish that there's we're not going to lose all the jobs is because we have to have experience and you're going to have prompting and thinking. You're going to have to continue to change, but like I said, I don't think there is ways of going back and doing things without manually is just it's not that's you're going to if you're putting that's part of your process as a way to mechanize how you think. I think you're missing the point. But the random thought is that it is interesting though of like what is original thought like in a school setting and you're testing knowledge. Like, do you need to know all the rules of grammar anymore? Well, I don't know if you do. It'd be nice if you did, but like there's other things you should learn, or what is the things that we're okay to have automated versus what are the things that we still need to have people know. You're a mathematician, statistician, all those different issues that you are like where is it that you had to be able to do that stuff and learn that? Where is it that it's you had to know how the tools and you had to interpret the results using tools and the lines are probably a little blurry, but you know, you probably spend a lot more time thinking about how you use the tools and the models than trying to figure out what made them. So
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think that that goes back to that sort of core curiosity in my mind. I think that, interview process since my very first job when I was a hiring manager, the thing I always over indexed on was curiosity. Like, I just want people who are naturally curious, and it is such a good indicator for so many other downstream traits that are just always accompanied. So, for example, if you're just naturally curious, you get really good at asking the right questions because you've had a lifetime of practice. Like, why does an elevator work? Like, why does this magic box go up and down? Like, if you're curious, you've probably spent time just thinking about that and wondering and then speculating and then testing. And then like, no, that's not quite right. Like, I wonder if it's, oh, maybe that. And I think that that just, those sort of neural pathways are only available to those who spend a lot of time just asking these questions. And it gives you the opportunity to take shortcuts. You just develop really good intuition about where can I kind of cheat, to your point, use tools. Where can I not? Where do I really have to invest my time to think deeply about this? Because the tools are probably not going to get it right. And I think that that is undoubtedly a really important trait moving forward. And one thing that will differentiate, I think, AI from humans for some time, right? And I think the second thing is, we've been alluding to this topic the whole time, of course, we haven't said it explicitly, which is like, you need people who are resilient and adaptable, people who are okay with the world constantly shifting under them, because I think we're far from settled. I think AI will continue to improve. I think the use cases that we can imagine within an organization will continue to be developed. And then the process, the change within the organizations will be almost a wholesale replacement. I legitimately believe Theory of Constraint style, The Goal, if you want to read that book, great. Like, I think that's what's going to happen. We're going to say, look, AI, here's our biggest bottleneck today for creating our widgets, for optimizing our processes, for whatever it is. Here are the big blockers. AI is going to come in and it's going to make that far better. And you're going to look at the output and be like, wait a minute, we improved the narrow bit of this process by 5x. We should have 5x the output, right? And he's just like, no, there's some new constraint in that system. What is that one? So you go after that one, and then the next one, and the next one. And I think by the time you're done with it, I don't think organizations are like even close to what it looks like today. I think it's, like law firms when you had secretaries versus law firms of today. They're just radically different. Everything about them just works differently, functions differently. Email changed the game for lots of businesses before, the cloud, et cetera. Like all of that has changed the way we work. And I think this is going to be as large, and I would speculate even larger than the changes we've encountered thus far. And so I think the second most important trait of people who will be thriving in this new economy for at least the next, call it 5, I don't know, maybe 10 years, will be those who are resilient and adaptable. And they're always just like, great, something else is changing, no problem. Like, that's great. That's a good thing. We're going to optimize this. Now we're going to change this over here. We're going to change it. And they like that. So I think that's going to be a big trait.
Yeah, which is just it's just interesting around, the so much of it that we're talking about today just really goes back to those core innate skills that we learn, and how you it's now it's AI. Before it was a plow, then it was this, and all these different elements of that. And I think that should be encouraging for our team, listeners. I mean, I think that I don't have to have your educational background, I don't have to have your resume to be able to be better at my job using these tools, and I think that that's really encouraging. And then, yeah, obviously, it's going to create tremendous opportunities for people who do have those ability to think about it differently, and I think that's perfectly okay too. I mean, I think I think you're going to have, different people are at different moments are going to have a chance to use those, those learnings and education and talents that are going to be able to do that. So I think it's clearly a time for that as well. And I get more optimistic every day in terms of what we're going to do and what's going to change. And I'm mindful of where I'm at in my career and the experience that I have and the role that I play. But meaning that, yeah, it's going to take different types of skills to learn that. But I think it is just an exciting time to be in the workforce. And I think those that embrace that and take that with optimism, I think those companies and those individuals are going to thrive. And those that are stuck a bit in just everything's changing are not. And I think it's pretty easy to tell which employees in this case, or even what clients are interested in that. So
Yeah, no doubt. And I guess, I think that the meta theme here for many leaders specifically is you think about we need to upskill and change how we work. We need to upskill our people, change how we work more broadly, and bring on a different type of person potentially in the future. I think the underlying angst is probably something like, okay, that's good. I'm in, but how am I going to keep my team motivated when the ground under them is constantly shifting? We talk from our change management org here. People we talk about just the change fatigue that's inevitable. If you change too much too quickly, it's just change fatigue and people get worn out and they don't like that. They don't adopt it. They start becoming much more curmudgeony than they were when you started. How do you think about that from your standpoint? Like, are there any really good tricks, anything you've seen internally or across clients or in your own experience running some of these change projects like that that have been really effective just to keep people really motivated?
Yeah, I don't know if there's tricks. I mean, there's definitely people that have a ton more than me. I think it tends to probably follow to some of my, just my own natural proclivity. I'm more motivated towards encouragement than I am criticism. I'm more motivated towards enthusiasm and you're showing people and getting excitement than I am about the fear of what we don't do. Both are very successful in different ploys. So I think some of it's just like, I think how you work through that. I mean, I think one thing that's kind of cool in our little business is that we have stories all the time of where you can use and bring that in, right? I mean, it's like so I think we have a lot of opportunity to do that and to show, get the examples of that where there's benefit from it. But I think incentives matter. The more you can have, obviously this is nothing new, yeah, but the more the incentives are intrinsic in terms of the learning opportunities versus others, the better. But like we don't always work in an environment where you can do the incentives that you'd like to do. So I think it's gotta be you gotta make it towards growth. One of the things that I've been in my roles, and I'm not saying this is a useful trait or not, but for me, but yeah, I often think about my leadership roles in the terms of what am I pulling and what am I pushing. Sometimes you just gotta pull the organization with you and you gotta just kinda you gotta trust that they're gonna take him where you're gonna go. You're gonna change. I think you've been doing that for us over the last number of years. And sometimes you're gonna push. You're gonna hey, we know where we're going, but they need some momentum behind it and how you're gonna do that. I think that organizations are always going to have to oscillate between that. Leaders are going to have to work through that. And then you have to operate. I think that the more you're willing to take risk or just even having an optimistic perspective, even if you're risk, I mean, I'd probably put myself optimistic in nature, probably a bit risk adverse. Like, I mean, I think that that will get you further along than, extremes on either one of those. And so again, when we could listen back to this is going to be the Captain Obvious podcast, but it's like, but I think that sometimes these things and these traits are really what make differences. And it's why you're seeing adoption. It's why you're seeing people do things or why you're people working. And yeah, and I think, the one thing that's obviously, this is not just about use in AI adoption, but the press and the news and all the stuff, the social, it's all sensational. So you end up getting the extremes on all sides of that. And I think, yeah, so it's going to be the most amazing thing ever. It's going to be the worst thing ever. You're going to know this, know that. And I think for us, I think how you continue to push it and use it and just enjoy the change journey. I think it's kind of fun. And if you can't enjoy the change journey, that's probably one of your traits why they shouldn't be around. So
Right. Yeah, I agree. And it might be obvious stuff or sort of rudimentary. You've been doing change in leadership for a long time. So I'm sure a lot of it's very obvious to you. I don't think it's always obvious to our listeners. And more importantly, even if it is, I think it's reassuring. It's reassuring to know that, in fact, the same things that we've been doing forever in this space will continue to work and that we've seen them continue to work in this new era. And I think that's just comfort. It's very encouraging to hear, like, oh, actually, I do have the tools in my toolbox. I do know how to do this. I've done it before for other technologies, other moments in time. This is just the same thing, maybe a little bit more extreme in terms of how much is changing and how quickly. But I think it's the same toolbox. I think that's quite comforting in many regards. The other thing I would say is that if you really want to study organizations that have thrived in these moments, I think you go look at the Silicon Valley companies that were real disruptors and you analyze what did they do? How is it that they were changing so much? They were always the underdog, by the way, and yet they ended up winning. And again, survivorship bias, because that's what they're going to look at. I get it. But my point is like, what are the characteristics of the people they hired? What were the characteristics of their culture? What were the characteristics of the decisions they made and decision matrices they used to make those decisions? I think that you'll learn a lot. I've learned a lot from being at some of those companies. And you said it, which is one of the things you really have to do is you have to be okay with taking bets and them not working out. The whole point is nobody's done it. Nobody has figured out or cracked the code on how to use AI perfectly in any organization in the world. So there is no playbook to follow. And if there's no playbook to follow, the likelihood that you get every decision perfectly right the first time is effectively zero. So you're going to make mistakes. And I think that you have to embrace that and be okay with that. And again, there's lots of, cheeky things people say, like you didn't fail, you learn one more way not to do it, right? Like there's a million of these things. My point is that they are truisms, but they're also the right way to think about the world right now from my perspective. You have to take that sort of a little bit more risk seeking, a little bit more comfort with not getting every decision quite right. And I think that's why I say mid-market companies are probably so well positioned to do well, because those are traits they already kind of have by and large. And enterprises have adopted a much more ossified position where they're much more thoughtful, they're much slower in decision making, much more analysis paralysis that shows up. And when they get something wrong, they're quite adverse to getting anything wrong. But I'm optimistic, like you said, same as you. And I've seen it within Microsoft for specifically when I was there. It's a very rigid, very waterfall organization. I saw them transform pretty quickly into an organization that was a lot more agile, willing to take risks. Certainly did not get it all right when we launched Office 365, the first online version of Office. Like we got a lot wrong, but those people were not held to the same level they would have been held a couple years before that of you failed, you're fired. It was, okay, great. We learned how not to do that. How are we going to quickly iterate? And did you make good design decisions that allow us to do that? And if you did, you're good. And so I think it's just back to the basics in many regards. And I think that if you have an optimistic, positive attitude towards the world out of us, and I do, I think it'll be actually good for everybody in the long term. I think it's pretty straightforward. Basic, maybe, but I think
Okay.
we're, yeah,
So maybe you're saying we have a chance. You and I have a chance. I love that.
you have a
Yeah,
chance. That's
we
right.
have a
You're saying there's
chance.
a chance. There's a
That's
chance. Yeah.
good. That's good. I
Well,
don't have to envision a world where I have to eat bonbons and let a machine do all my work. I love that. So,
yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so. It's possible, but I don't think so. I think if that world showed up, we'd probably overthrow it, honestly. So in closing, as we wrap up today, we've covered a lot. I think the headline of it is really that there is a lot of change coming. We're already starting to see the early stages of that. And the biggest one is how do you get your people ready for it? How do you get your people to adopt it, to embrace it, to explore? How do you encourage new people who are coming to the org to continue to push the bounds of that? What do you look for in the characteristics of people who will be successful long term? How do you have the courage to make decisions as a leader, as you said? And then really like, if you look at what's poised to do really well, I tend to believe it's that mid market. We'll see. I might be proven wrong, but I think it's going to be there first, and we'll see how that then impacts the larger enterprise customers as the incumbents largely who are being disrupted actively. We'll see. I don't know. Any closing thoughts from you though, Kevin?
it just I would echo the fact that I think it's those that want to change, those that are curious, those you think big, big, small. I mean, even that the mid markets. I think that you can incorporate that into your existing firms, but like, yeah, and how that plays out. But I would just encourage everyone to find people that you're enthused. I mean, the last thing, not to reopen a bigger theme, but it's interesting listening to you a second ago, and I'm thinking about different leadership styles. You're thinking about the Musk prototype, Silicon, get one inspirational leader that's going to literally wheel one way. Then you think about some of the other Silicon teams that really were teams, and they they were the teams that worked. Some of the reasons why things fail is because you had a leader that was trying to either control the outcome or make sure certain things were a certain way. And I think that so I'd encourage people to find people that you work well with, find teams. And if you want to be a must, be a solo entrepreneur, and maybe you can get big. But for most of us, I think it's going to be find teams that you work with and people that you work with that challenge you. And I think that the more you bring different brains and different people and have a curious and creative output, it's going to be really cool to see what you can create. So,
No doubt. Well, with that, thank you, Kevin from Atlanta. Appreciate you dialing in and joining me today.
yeah.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us today on this episode of Pure Signal. If you have any more questions or comments, please visit us at the insights page at credera.com. Thank you.